Welcome to the deep dive. Our aim here is pretty straightforward. Take this huge ocean of information out there and, well, boil it down to the insights that really matter for you.
Yeah, sort of a shortcut to getting up to speed quickly.
Exactly. And today we're plunging into tech, AI, and cybersecurity. Some really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, Mike.
We've gone through a ton of material, looking for the key themes, the shifts, and frankly, some surprising things that are shaping how all this evolves.
So the mission today is really to synthesize all that, connect some dots for our listeners.
Right. Help everyone understand what's actually significant right now in this space.
And what's really transformative, I think, is this idea that the internet itself, it's become this massive, intelligent sensor.
Is a sensor? How do you mean?
Well, it's constantly gathering data, right? Billions of interactions happening all the time.
Okay, yeah.
And it means the digital world isn't just reflecting our lives anymore. It's actually starting to drive what happens in the physical world. It's shaping reality.
So the online world is dictating terms to the real world, in a way.
Increasingly, yes. Think about the sheer amount of information. Every post, every click, every purchase online. It's a data stream like we've never seen before.
Okay, so the internet's this giant sensor, but it's not just passively sitting there recording things, is it? I mean, making sense of all that, that must be a huge undertaking.
Oh, absolutely. Huge effort. And that's really where things like machine learning, big data analytics, and AI come into play.
Right, the tools to actually understand it.
Exactly. They're like the interpreters for this massive digital conversation. They help us cut through the noise, find those hidden patterns.
And pull out insights.
Meaningful insights, yeah. Things that can affect, geopolitics, spotting cyber threats before they hit, even helping support warfighters with critical intel.
So it's like this global intelligence network, but operating digitally. I saw someone describe it as a Bloomberg for intelligence. Is that a fair comparison?
I think it's helpful, yeah. It paints a picture of a platform delivering real-time, actionable intelligence from all sorts of sources, like how traders use Bloomberg terminals.
Got it.
And speaking of actionable intelligence, there's a really concrete example that it really opened my eyes to the real-world impact of this kind of monitoring.
I found serious. What happened?
Well, back during the 2016 election cycle, analysts actually found someone, an individual, on a dark web forum.
Okay.
And they were trying to sell access to an electoral assistance commission's systems.
Wow. Seriously, just selling access to something that critical.
Yeah. Now, at that point, it didn't look like a state actor, more like someone who'd found a way in and was just looking to cash in. It really highlights how critical infrastructure can be a target for purely financial motives.
That's kind of terrifying. How do you even stumble across something like that? Where do you look?
Well, these kinds of things tend to cluster in specific places online. Back then, dark web forums were pretty common for this. Now, we're seeing a lot of it shift to platforms like Telegram, actually. Interesting shift.
Yeah. But in this case, someone had likely used some exploit, maybe tricked a database into giving out more than it should. Standard stuff, unfortunately. And then they basically put up an ad. Got access, who wants it?
And your team saw that listing.
We did. And in a pretty unusual step, the decision was made to actually try and buy the access.
You bought it. Why?
Well, it was about understanding the threat directly, getting firsthand insight into what kind of breach it was, what the real risks were, and of course that information was immediately passed to the authorities.
That must have been a real wow moment.
Definitely an aha moment, just seeing how real these dangers are, lurking in those, hidden corners.
So the dark web, it's not just this mythical, scary place. It's literally a marketplace. What's the main driver there?
Exactly, a marketplace. And yeah, for a large chunk of it, the driver is simple. Money, financial gain, people buying and selling data, tools, access, illegal services.
So it's different from, say, state spying. Very different motivations usually. State espionage has strategic goals. This is often just commerce, albeit illicit commerce. You have these forums like MozzaExploit.in. Some have been around for ages, like 20 years plus.
Wow.
Most run on Tor, gives them anonymity. They function as marketplaces.
And you said this is still happening, like right now.
Oh, yeah. In fact, just within the last few hours, literally there was a new listing, someone offering server access to a major software company.
Today.
And you can imagine that kind of access, it can cause major problems fast. Our systems are pulling that data in right now, analyzing it, generating alerts. It just shows how constant and dynamic these threats are.
So who buys this kind of access? If someone's selling it, who's the customer?
Often, it's other criminals.
In that software company case. Buying that access could be the first step for a ransomware attack, for instance.
Oh, okay.
The whole cybercrime ecosystem is surprisingly specialized. You've got people who are good at getting that initial foothold, breaking in.
Access brokers. Right. Then you've got others who buy that access. Then the ransomware gangs themselves. Some even run like franchises, believe it or not. And then the people who handle the crypto payments, the money laundering side.
The whole industry.
It really is. And yeah, you do see a significant number of actors operating from Russia, but it's definitely not limited to there. It's global. But the motivation. Selling access opens the door for someone else to do something damaging, usually for profit, like ransomware.
Getting into these forums, these marketplaces, it sounds like it takes more than just knowing the web address. Is AI involved in how people get into these places?
Yeah, you don't just browse there like regular websites. It requires what we call tradecraft.
Tradecraft.
It's a mix, some human social engineering, maybe building trust or reputation, but also increasingly sophisticated automated tools, scrapers, that try to get in and gather data.
So bots.
Very clever bots. They have to mimic human behavior quite well to avoid getting kicked out. It's almost like they need to pass a mini Turing test, but for appearing like a legitimate criminal user.
Artificial criminal behavior. That's a phrase.
It kind of fits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's about blending in to gain access.
Fascinating. And a bit chilling. It makes you think about the companies trying to track all this. Your background. Your first company, Spotfire, was different, right? Focused on structured data.
Yeah, completely different world in some ways. Spotfire is all about visualizing data that was already organized, in databases, spreadsheets,
Yeah.
neat rows and columns.
So what sparked the idea for Recorded Future? What was the leap?
It was really after Spotfire was acquired. I had some time to think, and this idea started clicking. Spotfire dealt with structured data. But the internet, it's this vast ocean of unstructured stuff, human language, text, conversation.
Right. Messy data.
Exactly. And the aha moment was thinking, what if we could build analytical engines to process that directly? To read all that text, pull out the key things, who, what, where, when, the entities and events, and structure it then for analysis. That was the core idea.
And the name Recorded Future, it's quite memorable. Where did that come from?
Well, the initial concept had a strong element of looking for future events mentioned in text. Like a CEO's travel plans or a planned product launch.
Finding future clues in present data.
Precisely. One of the co-founders, Eric, he first suggested recorded time, maybe borrowing from Shakespeare, I think.
Okay.
But the domain name was taken, so Recorded Future was the alternative. And honestly, it probably fits even better in hindsight.
Why is that?
Because it captures that core belief. A lot of what's going to happen, or could happen, is already being discussed or hinted at somewhere in all the information out there. Most secrets are already known somewhere. The trick is finding them and putting the pieces together.
So it sounds like you built this powerful analysis engine first, this big hammer, as you've called it, and then figured out the best places to use it rather than starting with a specific customer pain point.
That's a pretty fair way to put it, yeah. With Spotfire, we also started broad, visualize anything, and then found that really strong fit in pharma research.
Right.
With Recorded Future, we saw potential applications all over. Strategic foresight, commercial intelligence, sales intelligence, lots of ideas.
But intelligence agencies became a major focus early on.
The early investment definitely steered us that way. Getting funding from In-Q-Tel, which invests on behalf of the U.S. intelligence community, and Google Ventures, that naturally pushed us heavily towards the intelligence applications. So yes, build the hammer, then find the most important nails.
You've done this twice now, built and sold companies. What's a key lesson learned from the first time that you applied differently at Recorded Future? Something our listeners could maybe learn from.
Focus. Definitely focus. With Spotfire, like I said, we found success by eventually narrowing down to that pharma niche.
Right.
With Recorded Future, early on, we actually tried to pursue two big tracks at once, intelligence and quantitative financial trading. For a few years.
Spreading yourselves thin.
Exactly. A board member finally, very wisely, pointed out we were diluting our efforts, making the tough call to drop the quant trading side and focus purely on intelligence. That was crucial. It let us really concentrate resources and accelerate.
Interesting.
Maybe another thing was picking a bigger wave to ride. Cybersecurity and intelligence became such huge growth areas with massive investment. Being focused on a really valuable, growing problem definitely helped.
And within that intelligence focus, how has the AI you use actually changed over the years? It must have evolved massively.
Oh, night and day. Absolutely remarkable evolution. We started with, pretty basic rule-based systems. Think complex if-then-else logic to pull out names, places, events.
10 coded rules.
Lots of them. Then we moved through generations of more sophisticated extraction tools, eventually getting into machine learning models. The real leap forward has been in natural language processing, NLP. We went from needing separate models trained for every single language
Yeah.
to now having these huge unified models that can understand and pull information from text across dozens of languages simultaneously.
One model for many languages.
Yeah, and they even show surprising ability to learn across languages. Like understanding a concept in English helps it understand the same concept in, say, Chinese, even if it wasn't explicitly trained that way. For our users, it means getting that global picture much faster, regardless of the original language of the threat discussion.
And what about the really recent stuff? Generative AI, the LLMs. How's that changing the game now?
That's been another huge shift, a real game changer for the analysis part. Before, AI could help summarize text, maybe find connections.
Okay.
Now with generative AI, we can ask much more complex questions like, what are the potential second-order effects of this geopolitical event? Or generate a daily briefing on emerging malware threats targeting the financial sector in Japanese.
Wow, that's a huge leap in capability.
It is. It automates tasks that used to take human analysts hours or days, frees them up for higher-level thinking. And these models aren't just limited to text anymore. They can integrate insights from images, from network flow data, malware code analysis, giving you a much richer, multidimensional view of the threat landscape.
When these large language models really took off, was their potential immediately obvious, even to people in the AI field?
Honestly, not completely, not to everyone right away. The speed of progress got many by surprise, but there were definitely sharp, forward-leaning people, particularly within some government agencies, who saw the potential very early and started figuring out how to leverage it almost immediately.
Combining their specific data with this broad AI capability.
Exactly. The power comes from fusing that deep, often classified internal knowledge with the broad, real-time intelligence you can gather from the open internet using these advanced AI tools. It's a potent combination for understanding threats.
You also mentioned your company's involvement in the conflict in Ukraine. Can you shed some light on that? What does it tell us about modern cyber conflict?
Yes, Ukraine was already a customer before the full-scale invasion began. Given our stance on the aggression, we decided to provide additional technology and support.
How is it used?
In various ways, providing intelligence and threat visibility. We believe it's been a valuable contribution. But what's also significant, from an intelligence perspective,
Yes.
is that when a nation is under such intense, widespread cyber attack, it almost becomes like we called it a gigantic honeypot.
Honeypot. Because all the attacks are visible.
Precisely. You get this incredibly concentrated view of modern malware, state-sponsored tactics, tools, infrastructure, all being thrown at one target. By analyzing those attacks in real time, we learn an immense amount about the attacker's methods.
And that knowledge helps everyone.
Exactly. Those insights feed back into our systems, improving defenses for all our customers. It becomes a form of collective cyber defense, learning from the front lines.
That makes sense. But operating globally, working with governments, that must involve some tricky ethical decisions. How do you decide who you will and won't work with?
It's a really critical question and something we have a formal process for. There are the straightforward cases, countries under legal restrictions or sanctions, like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Sudan, Syria. We simply don't do business there.
Okay, that's clear. But what about the gray areas?
For more nuanced situations, maybe other countries with questionable human rights records, or even companies suspected of engaging in offensive hacking, we have an internal review. It's like a flowchart combined with a committee discussion to weigh the factors and make a principled decision.
And what are the guiding principles?
A key one is that our software is inherently defensive. It's designed for threat intelligence, for understanding risks, for cyber defense. It can't be used to launch attacks or cause physical harm.
And you can control access.
Yes, because it's a hosted software-as-a-service model, we technically retain the ability to cut off access if a customer were found to be misusing it or if the situation changed dramatically.
Is there a risk of that being used politically, cutting off access based on shifting alliances?
It's a valid concern. We mitigate that through strong know your customer or KYC processes up front, and the fact that we primarily deal with large enterprises and government agencies, not individuals. It makes abrupt, politically motivated cutoffs less likely and more complex.
You made a really interesting statement earlier, something like, In the last 25 years, the internet reflected the world. But in the next 25, the world will reflect the internet. Can you unpack that a bit more? What does that really mean for us?
Sure. Think about the early internet, say up to the mid-2010s. Mostly it was about taking things we did in the real world, shopping, communicating, reading news, and putting them online. The internet mirrored reality.
Okay, that makes sense.
But now we're entering a phase where things that start online trends on social media, new digital business models, online movements, even disinformation campaigns are having increasingly profound impacts back on the physical world.
So the direction of influence is reversing.
It's becoming much more bidirectional, and arguably, the internet's influence on the world is growing stronger. How we socialize, how businesses operate, how political discourse happens, it's all being reshaped by dynamics originating online. For you listening, it means realizing the digital sphere isn't just a separate space anymore. It's fundamentally intertwined with and shaping our physical reality.
What does that imply for something like democracy? That's a major concern for many.
It's a huge question. I'm personally a strong believer in democracy, but we also have to acknowledge, historically, it's relatively new and often fragile.
True.
As the internet allows groups to form an influence to spread across borders, detached from physical nations, how does democracy adapt? There are obvious risks, manipulation, foreign interference, echo chambers.
Definitely seeing that.
But there's also potential upside. Maybe greater citizen awareness, new forms of participation, more global conversations. Resilience might come through education, critical thinking, helping people navigate this complex information environment. For you, it means being vigilant about the threats, but also hopeful about the possibilities.
Let's circle back to the tech itself. The balance between offense and defense in AI and cyber warfare. Where do you see that heading?
It's accelerating. The speed of attacks is increasing. We already see AI used to make phishing emails much more convincing, more personalized.
Yeah, those are getting harder to spot.
The next logical step, and it's probably not far off, is AI developing and launching attacks autonomously. AI versus AI in cyberspace.
So defenses need AI too.
Absolutely essential. You'll need AI-driven defense systems just to keep pace. There's an old saying in security, you have to know your network better than the bad guy.
All right.
AI might actually be able to achieve that level of intricate understanding, potentially better than human IT teams can, just due to the scale and speed involved.
Right.
But then you have the disinformation challenge.
What about it?
The potential for a huge percentage of online content, text, images, video, to be machine-generated in the future. Telling fact from fiction could become incredibly difficult. And thinking further out, in actual warfare, autonomous drones, AI-controlled weapon systems, it paints a pretty stark picture of future conflicts. For you, it just underlines the urgency of developing robust, ethical AI and strong cybersecurity postures.
You mentioned earlier the dark web activity migrating to Telegram. Why Telegram specifically? What's the attraction there for criminals?
It's an interesting dynamic. Platforms like Signal are really focused on robust end-to-end encryption and decentralization, often favored by people who are extremely security conscious, journalists, activists, etc.
Right.
Telegram uses different encryption methods and has a more centralized structure. But crucially, it gained massive popularity in certain parts of the world, like Russia, Ukraine, and surrounding regions, for general communication.
So lots of legitimate users.
Millions. But that widespread adoption, almost unintentionally, made it a convenient place for illicit groups to blend in and conduct business too. It became a hub for everything from drug sales to hacker forums to terrorist propaganda, alongside normal chat.
So it became an intelligence source by accident?
In a way, yes. Its popularity in key regions made it a place where you could find signals intelligence, alongside all the noise. Doesn't mean everyone on Telegram is doing bad things, obviously far from it. But for those tracking threats, it became another important place to monitor. For you, it shows how threat actors adapt and use legitimate platforms for their own ends.
Given all this, dealing with dark web content, tracking threat actors, the designation by Russia, does the personal security aspect ever weigh on you? Do you worry about being targeted?
It's something you have to be conscious of, definitely. We're not naive about the risks. Have we received threats? Yes.
That must be unsettling.
It is, but you can't operate effectively from a place of fear. We take it seriously. We have security measures in place. Information security is paramount, obviously, but also physical security considerations. That designation by Russia as an undesirable enemy of the state certainly gets your attention.
I bet.
But you also maintain perspective. We're analysts providing intelligence. We're likely not target number one for major state actors compared to, say, government officials or military assets. but caution.
Yeah.
Yes, constant vigilance on security, absolutely.
And finally, the big news recently was the acquisition of Recorded Future by MasterCard. Can you talk about the thinking behind that? What does it mean going forward?
Yeah, it's an exciting development. MasterCard actually has a very significant and growing services business beyond just processing payments. A big part of that is in cyber and intelligence services for their clients, particularly financial institutions.
Ah, so there was overlap.
Complementarity, really. Our deep threat intelligence capabilities fit very well with their existing suite of services. There are obvious synergies, especially around financial crime intelligence.
Like tracking stolen credit cards.
Exactly. Imagine combining our intelligence on where cards are being sold or compromised with MasterCard's view of the financial network. That creates powerful new ways to fight fraud and protect customers.
Will you still operate independently?
Yes, Recorded Future continues to operate as an independent unit within MasterCard. That was important. And frankly, the cultural fit felt right, and there's a shared long-term vision for tackling these big security challenges.
Any quick advice, maybe for listeners whose companies might go through an acquisition, on navigating that transition successfully?
Well, number one is keep executing. Nothing matters more than continuing to deliver on your core mission and hitting your goals. That builds trust and value.
Makes sense?
Second, proactively build relationships across the new parent organization. Understand their world, find allies, figure out how you can help each other. Don't just sit in your silo.
Good point.
And third, well, it sounds simple, but keep working hard. An acquisition isn't the finish line. It's often the start of a new demanding chapter. Success still requires dedication and effort.
Great advice. So, to wrap up our deep dive today,
Yeah, so for you, the listener, we've really touched on how the internet acts like this giant sensor, gathering intelligence. We've looked at the reality of the dark web, less mystery, more marketplace, often driven by money.
right.
We explored how AI has dramatically evolved, from basic rules to sophisticated LLMs, and how that's reshaping cybersecurity and intel analysis. We touched on the geopolitics, the ethical tightropes.
The Ukraine situation, the MasterCard acquisition.
Exactly. And that bigger idea, how the online world is increasingly shaping our physical one. Hopefully, understanding these pieces helps you stay informed of what's a really complex, fast-moving world.
Thanks for listening and stay tuned. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.